for visiting protesters there. In turn, the Speaker gets a please explain request from the Prime Minister. So what's going on and how many others have been banned? More smash and grabs leave Auckland retail workers on edge, and we talk to police about whether young criminals are getting off scot-free. Roe versus Wade, the landmark US court ruling that legalised abortion may be overturned. Has the government petrol tax break already been soaked back up at the pump? And a shortage of cleaning staff means the shine could go off some five-star hotels and resorts. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook or Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Ahimadi, I'm Evie Ashton. MPs from all parties in Parliament are meeting to discuss the trespass notices issued to former MPs, including Winston Peters. The New Zealand First Leader and former National MP Matt King have been trespassed from Parliament for 2 years for attending the illegal occupation earlier this year. Here's political reporter Katie Scotcher.
Mr Peters, who toured the occupation for no more than an hour, has described the move as unlawful and is vowing to fight it. The notices were issued by Parliament's security team on the authority of the Speaker, Trevor Mallard. He won't comment, but Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says he is ultimately responsible for the decision, and she has asked him to consult with MPs. A meeting of the All-Party Parliamentary Service Commission has been convened.
The National Party wants to know what legal advice is behind the move against Mr Peters, which frontbench MP Chris Bishop describes as extraordinary.
I don't like the guy much, but he has been a Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand on 2 occasions, one of our longest serving MPs. He just visited the forecourt and he didn't camp out at the protest. My understanding is he just basically went for a wander and a tiki tour. So we are in quite constitutionally uncharted waters here.
The Green Party says Winston Peters must face the consequences of his actions, just like everyone else. The man who stabbed 4 people in a knife attack in a central Dunedin supermarket has been jailed for 13 years. On May the 10th last year, Luke Lambert used kitchen knives from a countdown shelf to stab 2 staff and 2 customers. He was sentenced in the High Court in Dunedin this afternoon on 4 counts of attempted murder and won't be eligible for parole until late 2027. An Auckland jeweller says the recent surge in the number of ram raids and burglaries in the city has left him living in fear. Harish Lodhia of Sona Sansar says it's only a matter of time before someone is seriously injured.
I have been here 35 years and do not intend to go anywhere, but the constant fear of being attacked is always looming over our heads.
Harish Lodhia says they're often forced to operate with shutters down, watching the door rather than customers. The US Supreme Court has reportedly voted to overturn the landmark 1973 Roe versus Wade decision that legalised abortion in the United States. If confirmed, the ruling would allow each state to decide whether to restrict or ban abortion. Former Texas State Senator Wendy Davis says it's deeply shocking.
This is a moment that we hoped we would never see, and there will be no end in sight to it. We've already seen here in Texas a young woman in the Rio Grande Valley criminally charged for choosing to abort a pregnancy. I truly believe this is where we are headed if indeed in June or July this comes to pass.
And a government-commissioned review of the detention of asylum seekers has concluded it is inhumane and wrong at every level. Immigration New Zealand says it intends to act on the review so such people will no longer be detained long-term in corrections facilities. Jill Bonnet reports.
No asylum seekers have been detained for the past 2 years, but in the 5 years to 2020, 86 were. The review says current policies paint a grim picture of how New Zealand treats them. Its author, Victoria Casey QC, says short-term detention may sometimes be necessary, for example while biometric checks are made, but not in a police cell. She says a previous proposal to create a detention facility near Auckland Airport to also hold immigration detainees awaiting deportation should be reconsidered.
To sport now, and Warriors halfback Ash Taylor has been forced into early retirement on medical advice. The 27-year-old, who has osteoarthritis, has played just one game this season because of hip problems. He says that when he signed on with the club, he thought he had plenty of NRL seasons left.
I knew my time in the game was coming to a standstill after playing my recent match and going to the park the next day and couldn't stand up to play with my children in pain, and it was gradually declining. It was coming to a stage where I could see opportunities in training and games, but my body physically, especially my hips, couldn't do what my mind was telling me to do.
The Chiefs' Super Rugby match against the Fijian Ndrua will now be played in Lautoka on May the 28th and not Robina on the Gold Coast as originally scheduled. A sellout crowd watched the Ndrua play their first game on home soil when they hosted the Highlanders on Saturday. Ronnie Sullivan says a little help from the snooker gods helped him to a 7th World Championship crown. The 46-year-old Englishman's win over countryman Judd Trump makes him the oldest winner and equals Scotsman Stephen Hendry's all-time record of 7 titles. However, he says he's never been bothered by setting records.
Don't get me wrong, when you get him you go, OK, that was kind of nice, but I've never performed well if I'm going for stuff like that. I just try to enjoy the game, compete, enjoy being on the circuit, and then just let the snooker gods decide what they're going to decide.
45-year-old Welshman Ray Reardon was the previous oldest champion. That's the news.
A construction company goes bust.
We tried to work with them and we offered them a lifeline, and that 600 grand that should be in the subbies' pockets is gone.
Ruapehu rumbles.
Magma's really driving this period of unrest, which is a little bit concerning for us because we really haven't seen this, as I say, over the last 2 decades.
And an evil Bible is found in Christchurch.
I was terribly sceptical. I thought, this can't possibly be a wicked Bible. And that's exactly what it is. And it's probably the most exciting thing that I will ever come across.
Exciting every morning. Morning Report, 6 to 9 weekdays on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, fine apart from isolated showers. From Waikato to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mainly fine with areas of fog morning and night. A few showers about Gisborne tomorrow and isolated showers elsewhere tomorrow afternoon and evening. Mostly cloudy for Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, with a few showers until this evening, long fine spells tomorrow. To the South Island, Nelson and Marlborough fine apart from isolated afternoon showers about the ranges and low cloud tomorrow evening. Canterbury and Otago mainly fine, however there's low cloud or fog about the coast and Canterbury Plains at times. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, also Southland, fine apart from isolated showers about Bulla, Northern Westland and Southern Fiordland until this evening. And for Kohu, the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have the news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi mo te rā iwi, tēnā koutou katoa no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Speaker Trevor Mallard's been told to consult other parties over his decision to trespass Winston Peters from the grounds of Parliament for 2 years. The former Deputy Prime Minister is one of several people, including former National MP Matt King, who have been issued the notices after visiting the occupation at Parliament 2 months ago. Winston Peters says it's an unlawful and dictatorial decision. This afternoon, Jacinda Ardern asked the Speaker to clarify what's happened. Here's our political reporter, Katie Scotcher.
I know thousands like you.
It's
sad to say. I know businessmen and women have lost everything.
The former Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters touring the illegal occupation on Parliament's grounds.
I'm here to talk to these people and hear them out. I'm not here to talk to you.
Mr. Peters' visit was quick, no more than an hour. But it's come with consequences. He's been trespassed from Parliament for 2 years, the place he worked for more than 4 decades.
This is an outrage.
Mr. Peters has launched a scathing attack against Parliament's Speaker in response, saying New Zealanders shouldn't put up with his totalitarian behaviour. He's also lawyered up and is promising to take a stand.
It's unreasonable and unlawful. And I'm very confident about where this is going to go now.
Wellington barrister Graham Edgler says the move is not necessarily unlawful.
There is a line and it's not ridiculous to have drawn it where it was. Everyone knew that the grounds were closed and knew, particularly with blaring out, there were warnings to leave, repeated. over the course of the several weeks they were there.
Mr Peters joins several high-profile people who've been trespassed for attending the illegal occupation, including former National MP Matt King.
I just exercised my right to peaceful and passive protest at that ground, and trespassing me is just pathetic.
Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson says Mr Peters and Mr King are simply paying the price for visiting the illegal occupation.
Whether or not it's former MPs or not is a little bit beside the point for us. It's actually just the Greens, we are an activist party. We accept the consequences and understand what we are doing when we uptake civil disruption.
Davidson. Well, Mr Speaker, I hope you don't trespass me. Well, the member does know that my rights within here are pretty much absolute.
ACT leader David Seymour is warning this saga could lead to expensive court cases.
Trevor Mallard's petulance and pettiness seems to be at the heart of so much drama.
The move has outraged National MP Chris Bishop. He wants to know what legal advice Parliament's Speaker received.
We are in quite constitutionally uncharted waters here, and I think it's worth everyone just taking a breath and getting to the bottom of exactly what legal advice the Speaker has relied upon here, and that's certainly something that we'll want to be investigating as parliamentarians.
Parliament Speaker Trevor Mallard wouldn't comment, but it's understood he delegated the authority to trespass people to Parliament's security team.
But ultimately this does sit with the Speaker.
But the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has asked him to consult all parties in Parliament
And see if we can reach some consensus around how the issue of trespass notices and how they apply to everyone should be issued.
It's understood that meeting is happening now. Watch this space.
Well, here to analyse all the goings-on is former Minister and long-time MP and party leader Peter Dunn. Tēnā koe, Peter.
Tēnā koe, Lisa.
So, Winston Peters reckons it's dictatorial and a banana republic decision. What are your reckons?
Well, I've got no truck for Mr Peters or his style of politics, but I do think in this case he's got a point. I mean, after all, he was there. He wasn't a critical part of the protest. He was there on one particular day, grandstanding in front of the cameras the way he always does, and he ends up being banned from the grounds for 2 years. I think that's grossly over the top for the expression of a political opinion. He wasn't one of the keynote organisers. He was just a casual participant. And to suffer this fate, I think, is really quite extraordinary. And it speaks a lot, really, for the mentality of the Speaker, frankly.
Yeah, so what do you think it says about the mentality of the Speaker?
Well, it's a control mechanism. I mean, this was the man who wanted to have water cannon sprayed on the protesters who played, was it Barry Manilow songs all night to annoy them. It's a very puerile and petty response. And I think to end up in a situation where you've got people being banned, whether they were former members of Parliament or not, just for simply visiting Parliament grounds during that time, is excessive. Having said that, I think it's a different story altogether for those who were the key leaders of the occupation and for those who were there for the duration. I think they do deserve to be treated differently from casual participants.
What, so they should get trespassed?
Well, I think if they can be identified, I think there needs to be a stronger sanction. I wouldn't think a 2-year trespass order is appropriate, but some form of sanction to indicate the unacceptability of their behaviour. In the case of casual observers, really, like Mr Peters and anyone else that just happened to get caught up in it, I think this is a grossly over-the-top situation. And it raises some very serious issues. There's always been the right for people to go to Parliament to push their point of view. Politicians have always gone out and mingled with protesters. If we're now saying that if the point of view is unpopular, it leads to not only the participants in the protest being banned, but also the politicians who go to talk to them being banned. We're in very dangerous territory.
But a couple of points, Peter. First off, was he really a casual observer? I mean, he's an experienced former politician and Deputy Prime Minister. He would have known what he was doing, as you say, with the cameras there. And the other point you make about politicians have to be able to go and basically take the pulse of people who are outside, he's not a politician anymore.
No, he's not. He thinks he still is, and that's maybe a pointed issue. But frankly, my point is that there's no way you could suggest that he was one of the critical organisers of the occupation. He saw a political opportunity. He went to take advantage of it. We can have a view about how appropriate or inappropriate that was. But that doesn't justify him then end up being banned from Parliament grounds for 2 years simply for doing what he's always done, grandstand and try and play politics. On that basis, we'd have got rid of him years ago.
The 2 years is interesting because obviously that means the order extends beyond the election next year. So what do you think of that, given Matt King, who was also former national MP, is intending to run again for Parliament, Winston Peters likely too. That has implications in terms of campaigning.
It has big implications, and I don't know what Mr Peters' intentions are regarding the Tauranga by-election, which is just a month away, but if he were to run in that, and be successful, then the whole thing becomes a farce. I don't know what his plans are, as I say, but I think it's very dangerous territory to be getting into when you've got a situation where people are involved in an ongoing set of political activities. Different matter for those that organised what was really a rebellion. No problem with that. But I think just in the case of people who happen to get caught up in it, deliberately in Mr Peters' case, I concede, but he wasn't critical to the whole protest. He was trying to milk some advantage from it, and he shouldn't pay a price like this.
Is Trevor Mallard the right man for the Speaker's job, right person, and should he stay?
The answer to both questions is no. He's not the right person. He's not suited by temperament. He's got a vindictive political streak in him. The Speaker's supposed to be above party politics. He's been enmeshed in it right from the beginning. He's well outstayed his welcome. In fact, the person that should be trespassed is probably Trevor Mallard.
Thanks for your analysis, Peter. We appreciate your time. That is Peter Dunn, former minister and long-time MP there, talking about the trespass notice issued to Winston Peters. Homai o Whakaaro would really love to hear your feedback on this one. Nō reira, anei na kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. Winston Peters trespassed for 2 years. Buck stops with the Speaker, Trevor Mallard, for that. Other former politician, Matt King, has been trespassed as well, and potentially others. Is it a step too far? Text me, pātui mai. Let me know your thoughts, 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The spate of ram raids across Tamaki Makaurau has workers on edge and calling for stronger action. Overnight, the Harvey Norman and Huffer stores in Westgate and Ponsonby were burgled, and 3 people have been arrested. There was also a failed break-in at a Takanini mobile phone shop. Jonty Dine has been speaking to store owners.
Ram raids have recently graduated from dairies and liquor stores to luxury fashion shops such as Louis Vuitton and Gucci. Clothing store Huffer on Ponsonby Road is the latest prominent store to be targeted. It was burgled overnight, but not ram raided. Managing Director Kate Berry says young staff are fearful of being victimised and worried about locking up at night.
But it's also not okay that dairies are being hit and service stations are being hit and liquor stores are being hit. It's not okay that a car gets driven through almost in shopping centre. This needs a hard crackdown by the government and the police.
The spike in ram raids is also taking its toll on jewellery store owners.
They're on edge. We are trading in fear all the time with roller shutters down. We are focusing on the door rather than on the customer.
Some jewellers we spoke to have been operating in Aotearoa for over 30 years. They say this is easily the most unsafe and vulnerable they've ever felt. Brownson's jewellery director, Jained Ranaga, says the violent nature of crimes is also increasing.
These are becoming rampant and they are more aggressive day after day.
Harish Ladia of Sona Sansa Jewellers fears there's more to come.
It's only a matter of time that somebody is going to get hurt pretty bad if hopefully nobody loses their lives.
Many of the recent raids have been committed by people under 18, some as young as 11. Jewellers say the government needs to take a stronger stance.
They're challenging the police, and it's an embarrassment. It's a shame.
Owners are taking drastic measures to avoid becoming the next victim, investing in heavy roller doors and applying to council to install bollards.
Sometimes we have to lock the door. You see, we put a notice there. We are in business, but please, if you're a buyer, then you not for service.
Queen's Jewellery owner Philip Lynn and his daughter say this hurts their profits in their central Auckland store.
Essentially, we're getting an even harder squeeze for our margins because we have that increase in cost as well as, the decrease in sales.
Jainen Ranaga empathises with law enforcement.
Police are doing their jobs. Police are really frustrated. There's not a simple solution. but there needs to be something done, and something done very fast and soon.
Jewellers say the cost of a clean-up following a ram raid can get into the six figures. Despite the risks, Harish Lodia says he has no plans to shut up shop.
I have been here 35 years and do not intend to go anywhere, but the constant fear of being attacked is always looming over our heads.
The police say they arrested 3 people, including 2 men aged 19 and 18, following the overnight burglaries.
And joining us now is Huffa's Managing Director, Kate Berry. Kia ora, Kate. Do you think it's safe to be a retail worker in Auckland at the moment?
Oh, look, I think it's safe to be a retail worker in retail environments where there's good health and safety policies and procedures and training and support. Absolutely. These attacks aren't happening during the day. They're happening at night.
So in your case, what did they go for and what did they get away with?
In our case, they probably took around $10,000 to $15,000 worth of clothing or damaged it. So obviously when glass hits a T-shirt, we can't guarantee that we've got all the glass off, so we just have to destroy that product. And then the glass frontage in this case was 1 panel, so that was lucky. But that in itself is another $2,000 or $3,000.
Yeah, so where does it leave you? I mean, do you want to fortify the store?
Yes, I have called our landlord and said I'd like to put a roller door on the frontage, one of those solid steel ones, which I don't believe should be the look we're going for in any part of Auckland, not in low socio areas, not in high socio areas. Nowhere should have to do that on any store. And we've seen it and accepted it for years in some parts of Auckland, and I don't think we ever should have. And now we're considering that in a place like Ponsonby.
So what do you think is going on here? Because every day it seems someone else gets hit.
I think it's the state of our society at the moment and has been for a few years. We're seeing probably a combination of extreme poverty with desperateness and also then association with gangs. There needs to be something done about it. It's not about punishing those who are involved. It's about supporting them when they are children and teenagers to be healthy members of our society. It's about holding parents to account, and this isn't a problem for poor communities. Holding parents account in very wealthy communities in Auckland has to be done as well. These targeted attacks aren't necessarily from our low socio groups.
So what do you think the role of social media plays in all of this?
Social media is a blight on our society. I think where it is used well to communicate products and services and knowledge, I think that's a fantastic way of educating society. When it promotes and accepts anti-social behaviour and criminal behaviour, we need to make a stand. No one should be posting anti-social behaviour on social media and getting away with it, swearing, spitting on people, having any sort of low-level activity. That leads to this kind of activity. These people, and not saying in this particular case it was posted, but we've seen attacks posted on social media, and it's not okay. Society needs to stand up and say no, and it's actually the adults in our society that need to say no, this is not acceptable.
Because this is hard stuff, right, Kate? It's nothing that we can fix overnight. When you're talking about holding parents accountable, having some accountability on social media, that's hard stuff to police, isn't it?
Look, I think we can do it. I think there was a time where spray cans were hugely accessible and we had a huge amount of graffiti across our country. That doesn't happen anymore. I know we've got a bit of graffiti back at the moment, but certainly not like it was in the 80s and 90s. There needs to be societal and systemic change. There needs to be more accountability on parenting in this country. It is disgusting that teenagers are left at 11, 12, 13 to their own devices.
Really appreciate your time, Kate. All the best to you and your staff. That is Kate Berry, who is the Managing Director of Huffer, and they got, well, hit, I suppose you'd call it a smash and grab rather than a ram raid. It is 25 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Petrol pain is setting in once again as temporary government tax cuts start to wear thin. Prices are nearly back to where they were before the government slashed fuel taxes by 25 cents a litre. So today we took a tour around Auckland gas stations before asking an expert whether there's any light at the end of the tunnel. Here's our reporter Nick Trubert and cameraman Nick Monroe.
If you're a regular Checkpoint listener or keep an eye on pump prices, you may remember this from way back on February 8.
Kiwis love to drive, especially here in Auckland, where premium petrol prices are now up around the $3 mark. And we're back. 3 months on, petrol prices have returned to where they were. Despite the government's 25 cent a litre tax cut, the price of 91 in Auckland is approaching $3, and locals ain't happy about it.
$20 of fuel is like I'm fueling up now and then I go home and it's like all done. I don't know, sorry for my language, but it's bull.
I'm trying to do everything I can to minimise my fuel usage.
Prices are now they're just too much, too high.
Petrol pandemonium is back, as if it ever left. Prices pumped up to where they were before the government stepped in. Some stations in Auckland are selling 91 for near on $3 a litre. So as we took a morning drive down Onewa Road, we pulled over, keen to test the mood of motorists filling their tanks.
I've changed my driving habits. I put my car into neutral going downhill, things like that. Minimising short trips, things like that.
And spare a thought for the Kiwi tradie, already battling the price of equipment and materials, now battling to keep the car running.
For me to fill up a truck for the week, I can't do that, so I've got to vary what fuel I throw in the truck and then regulate where I'm going to be working. So you'll probably find that most of the shore guys don't go to the city to work or further out to Mangere East. They'll preferably stay over this side of the bridge.
And the driver who's just flown the nest, recently moving out of home, now covering her own car costs.
I can feel like, prices have actually... This is the first time I've started noticing the prices. I never did. But yeah, I don't know, $2 would be good, $2.50 would be better.
OK, but what about that tax reduction unveiled in March, good for 25 cents a litre off? Surely that's helped.
It didn't matter, what the 25 cents going to do?
Yeah, the difference is minimal, but I still think it's a step in the right direction. Any kind of discount is good.
I didn't really notice it. It's one of those things that you have to pay for. So I just pay it and carry on, really. No noticeable difference. It's expensive.
So what's happened? Is it just price gouging by fuel companies? Auckland University's economics professor, Robert McCulloch.
It's entirely unpredictable, but it's not looking like coming down anytime soon. And in particular, because the Europeans are trying to restrict Russian oil imports even more, it could even go higher. So there's absolutely no guarantee the price of petrol will start coming down.
That's a fairly grim picture, so I asked Professor McCulloch whether there's more the government could be doing.
My opinion is that they should have acted sooner. The Reserve Bank, whose job it is to achieve price stability, should have acted more quickly, going back about 6 months ago. Prices have been rising now since around March 2021. The inflation rate's been going up over the past year.
As for advice, well, we get a piece of that back at the pumps, where one of our motorists puts it this way.
I used to live at home. I've only just recently moved out living with my partner. I swear my life, it's don't leave home. Don't leave home. Live with your parents, you're going to be debt free.
Desperate times, desperate measures, and no end in sight to petrol pressure.
Right, if you caught that story on radio, don't forget that you can go onto our webpage and see the video version of our Two Nicks story. A lot of feedback coming in on Trevor Mallard trespassing Winston Peters from Parliament. This is because he visited the protesters, the anti-mandate protesters on Parliament grounds. This listener says, "This is awesome. Good on you, Trev. Pity it didn't happen 20 years ago." And Kevin from Hawke's Bay says, "I'm no protester and I don't support them or their causes, but the current government is losing the plot. Mallard is successfully bringing them down, self-destructive from within, one might say." Trevor Mallard needs to have a good look at himself, another listener reckons. He should trespass himself. Peters wasn't a casual observer, says this person. He's a high-profile ex-MP, giving the protesters support and confidence. Sean says, "Mallard just lost my vaccine support and Labour my vote." And Adrian has got in touch and says, "Mr Mallard's behaviour continues to be bizarre in this extreme. Democracies require nurturing. New Zealand does not want to walk the path of dictatorship. Time for Mr Mallard to retire. He no longer serves the people." Kia ora e te iwi e haere nei I a checkpoint. Mount Ruapehu is huffing and puffing and its Crater Lake is heating up. After 6, we talk to the police about what happens to children as young as 7 when they're caught committing some pretty serious crimes. And there's a shortage of hotel cleaners in Queenstown. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening, particularly about petrol. Get in touch about the prices in your area. Has that tax saving from the government been soaked up already? Let us know. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
The man who stabbed 4 people in a central Dunedin supermarket last year has been jailed for 13 years. Luke Lambert used kitchen knives from a countdown shelf to stab 2 staff and 2 customers. MPs from all parties in Parliament are meeting to discuss the trespass notices issued to former MPs, including Winston Peters. The New Zealand First Leader and former National MP, Matt King, have been trespassed from Parliament for 2 years for attending an anti-vaccine and anti-mandate occupation there earlier this year. Mr Peters says he will fight the Speaker's decision to trespass him. An Auckland jeweller says the recent surge in ram raids and burglaries in the city has left him living in fear. Harish Lodia says it's only a matter of time until someone is seriously hurt. And the managing director of clothing store Huffer, which was hit by a burglary last night, says the crimes have left young staff feeling fearful. The US Supreme Court has reportedly voted to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision that legalised abortion in the United States. The leaked ruling would allow each state to decide whether to restrict or ban abortion. 9,109 community cases of COVID-19 have been reported today and 20 people have died. There have been no new reports of the BA4 Omicron variant, a second case of which was reported yesterday. The government is further relaxing border restrictions to allow unvaccinated visa holders and permanent residents to skip MIQ. The rule change kicks in on Friday and will also apply to unvaccinated Australians who normally live in New Zealand. The government has also announced that all remaining MIQ facilities will be shut down by August, earlier than expected. And Auckland's biggest flu vaccine rollout begins this week at the city's COVID vaccination centres. There's growing concern that there'll be a widespread flu outbreak around the country this winter now that the border is more open. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It is time for business news. Ko taku hoi e nei, ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Let's start with building consents, Nona. So they've topped 50,000 annual number for the first time. Wowza.
Yeah, well, and the monthly number was also a record breaker at 5,303. So that's still 2 big numbers there. Bigger than what was the market was expecting. So perhaps this is the top, and we're going to start seeing a decline from here. And that's partly because of housing affordability, the cost of building these days, and so forth. So it's expected to moderate, that the numbers will decline just because of those conditions. And the type of dwellings that were consented also changed.
Townhouses?
Townhouses,
Right.
multi-family dwellings, so fewer single family dwellings, but not in the regions that they definitely had more of those. Also in Christchurch, where I guess it's a little bit cheaper to build still. And the other thing that was kind of interesting, I thought, was the concern about what's going on in, say, Auckland, all right? So a lot of the dwellings that we were consented for in Auckland were those multifamily ones. But most of the non-dwelling consents were in the big cities. So Auckland got quite a few of those. There's a lot of work in the pipeline. And so we're expecting to see some additional pressures because of labor market shortages and so on. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic because there's a demand, but there's also shortages.
Well, yeah, I think it's hugely interesting. Someone said, and I can't remember who it was, you can't live in a consent. So it looks good on paper, but until it's built, nobody can live in it. And you wonder whether they will all go ahead, because we're constantly hearing every day about supply of building products and your ability even to get tradespeople.
And yes, and then the people who can afford them. I mean, who can buy these properties to begin with? Housing affordability is really tricky right now because of all the constraints with credit availability, for one thing. Banks a bit reluctant to lend money to people to buy a property that might be worth less in a year from now.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is going to be how many are realised at the end of the day.
Yes, that's right.
Hey, Reserve Bank of Australia, it's lifted its official interest rate. What did they do compared to us?
Well, not a lot, to be honest. About a quarter of a percentage point, a quarter of a percent is what they raised it to. So it's 0.35%. Right. Which is not very much compared with where we are. We're at, 1%. So where there's mixed reviews there. Some market response was that the Reserve Bank in Australia is very late to the party, so to speak, because they have inflation rising there. What was their rate? 5.9%, I believe, something like that.
So a bit lower than ours, which was 6.9?
Yeah, no, 5.1 in Australia, 6.9 here.
Yeah, exactly.
So, they're a little bit behind us in that way, but they're still facing a lot of inflationary pressures there. And some people are questioning whether that percentage point, a quarter percentage point, is adequate, considering we're looking at, I think this is our fourth. We've had 4 rate hikes since October, and we're expecting another one this month of perhaps the same magnitude, which is 0.5%. So we'll see what happens with that. And the other thing is that the Standard & Poor's, which was one of the rating agencies, took a look at it. They're saying, well, it's not that much, but it may benefit the Australian banks, because anytime there's an interest rate hike, there's more room for them to make margin growth. So there's some winners there. Overall, some people are suspicious that what the Reserve Bank of Australia has done is not anywhere near enough to bring down that inflation number. They're expecting supply chain disruptions that have been inflating prices to retreat and move the inflation target back to within their own target range.
Yeah, and all interesting happening during an election campaign. Let's take a gallop around the markets.
And there's that. Okay. So our top 50 index, it fell 108 points. That was a drop of 0.9%. It was taking its lead, really. It's difficult with the Asian markets closed. So we're at 11,676. The New Zealand dollar did drop in reaction to the Bank of Australia's move. So we're at 64.3 US cents, 91.1 Australian, 51.4 pence, while the Australian dollar gained a little bit there because of the hike in interest rates. So there you go.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with our business news. The US Supreme Court could be overturning the landmark ruling which made abortion legal in that country. A leaked draft opinion, which has been obtained by political journalism site Politico, shows 5 justices are voting to overturn Roe versus Wade. If verified, the leak is unprecedented in the court's modern history. World Watch's Paulina Lau has more.
According to the document, 4 other justices voted to strike down the protection of abortion rights. Former Texas State Senator Wendy Davis says it's both unsurprising and deeply shocking.
This is a moment that we hoped we would never see, and there will be no end in sight to it. We've already seen here in Texas a young woman in the Rio Grande Valley criminally charged for choosing to abort a pregnancy. I truly believe this is where we are headed.
The landmark ruling in 1973 gave women an absolute right to a termination in the first 3 months of pregnancy. There are limited rights in the second trimester. The ruling would end a half-century guarantee of federal constitutional protection of abortion rights. It would allow each state to decide whether to restrict or ban abortion. Democratic strategist Robin Swanson says it would be a major setback for women's rights.
This has been in place for 50 years. And this would turn back the clock on women's rights in our country. What ultimately will happen is there will be a patchwork of laws. Again, in my state of California, Governor Newsom has already said it will be a sanctuary state for abortion providers.
Justices can change their vote and major decisions can be subject to multiple drafts. A final decision is expected in the next 8 weeks. But constitutional law professor Steve Vladek says this is groundbreaking.
It's an earthquake for how we think about precedent and whether the Supreme Court really can undo rights that prior generations of justices recognized. There really aren't a lot of examples of that outside of the specific context of economic rights. But also, it is an earthquake for the Supreme Court as an institution. We've never had a leak like this.
6 of the 9 current justices on the court were appointed by Republican presidents. Wendy Davis says if it is the majority ruling, the stakes for the midterm elections just got even higher.
If the court is going to abandon women across this country and the constitutional protections that we've had for more than 50 years, we can only rely now on the 2 other branches to make up what women will be losing throughout this country.
The leak comes amid rising restrictions for the procedure nationwide. Several Republican states have passed laws enforcing near-total ban on abortions. Neither the Supreme Court nor the White House has commented on the leak, but Robin Swanson says it's no accident.
It feels like something that was very, very planted. Things don't just happen to go to Politico. It's a political news sites, so it feels very politically motivated and it's just very troubling at its core.
Speaker of the House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer have issued a joint statement saying if the report is accurate, the Supreme Court is poised to inflict the greatest restriction of rights in the past 50 years.
As the budget creeps closer, Grant Robertson has unveiled a new set of rules governing how he and future finance ministers can divvy out funds. A new debt cap, a new way of measuring debt and a surplus rule will all have a big influence on the future of government spending. Here's political reporter Giles Dexter.
A 7:30 breakfast of eggs, coffee and fiscal policy. The finance minister used his first pre-budget breakfast speech to serve up some new rules.
The new fiscal rules will ensure we're controlling spending, keeping a lid on debt, and are able to make those important investments in infrastructure.
The government's putting fiscal rules back into this year's budget after abandoning them during COVID. It's changing the way it measures debt to include assets like the super fund and liabilities like Kāinga Ora.
What we're doing is more accurately representing New Zealand's fiscal position and putting it in line with the rest of the world, and everybody will transparently be able to see in the budget where our debt is on the old measure and where our debt is on the new measure.
And Grant Robertson unveiled a new debt ceiling, 30% of GDP. It gives more headroom for investment in multi-year projects. Mr. Robertson says it's a limit, not a target.
The kinds of initiatives that we will fund through infrastructure will need to be ones that meet a high bar. We also have to keep that buffer in there as well.
David Seymour says the government's giving itself more licence to borrow and spend.
The process of getting there and borrowing all that money will be highly inflationary, and that's something we can ill afford at this time. I can't think of any less appropriate change to fiscal policy than what Grant Robertson has done today.
After years of deficit, New Zealand's expected to reach a surplus in the 2024 to 25 financial year. That's 1 year later than originally forecast. The finance minister's blaming ongoing supply issues and the Ukraine crisis. National's Nicola Willis says the fault lies with him.
He is spending more than ever and he is pushing out New Zealand's pathway to surplus. It's very difficult for me to look at his speech today and see any sign that he is showing the discipline and careful management that New Zealand households are having to show right now.
Another new rule will ensure once New Zealand reaches that surplus, it can be maintained, keeping surpluses within a band of 0 to 2% so day-to-day spending isn't added to debt.
It really just really emphasises the importance of getting a careful balance in what we invest in, making sure that the projects we invest in are high quality. It's one of the reasons why we're doing the multi-year funding, is it gives us a much clearer picture of what we need.
Infometrics economist Brad Olsen warns it could lead to higher taxes in the future.
The big implication in my mind is that future larger amounts of government spending, if the government wants to make bigger decisions and spend a lot more, it is effectively going to have to raise taxes to fund that additional spend, because it can't look to debt fund, it can't look to put that burden on future generations.
Future generations are the focus of this year's budget, with health reforms and climate change set to get the lion's share on May 19th.
Concerns tonight. Top Queenstown hotels may have to lower their Gold Star standards because there aren't enough cleaners to go around. The boss of the Hilton says as tourist numbers bounce back, some visitors could be sleeping in unclean rooms because there simply aren't enough staff to service them, and some hotels have already been forced to ditch daily cleans. Hilton Queenstown General Manager Chris Eamon joins us now. Kia ora, Chris.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well. This doesn't sound too 5-star though, does it?
Yeah, it is a bit of a challenge, and I think that the challenge is not isolated to Queenstown, and it's certainly not isolated to hotels. I think it's a problem that any service industry is going to be facing over the next few months and years, the way it stands now.
So who exactly are you missing in terms of your workforce?
Well, I think the reality is that with the current immigration law, they're looking to allow people to come into the country with sort of mid or high skills. And they're expecting that all entry-level positions are to be serviced by working holiday visas. So if you look at an industry like tourism, so again, not hotels, but across all sectors, and this also applies to building as well, where you bring people into your business, they've got a low skill base or their entry-level position, and tourism and building, they all have systems in place to take people and grow them into new positions, give them the skills they require, and give them a pathway to better jobs, better income, and so forth. So those jobs currently aren't being filled, and so all of those businesses are really struggling to have people come into their business that they can actually develop, because they're all working holiday visa people, and they won't stay in the business.
Chris, you know, as soon as you say immigrant workers, that people are going to get in contact with us saying they get low pay. Why do you need immigrant workers? If you paid more, you could get New Zealanders to fill those jobs.
Listen, that's a great question. And I think that kind of comes to the fact that we are so fortunate to live in such an amazing country like New Zealand. If you have people here going to school, most of them will go to post-secondary education, they're going to go to university, and they're going to upskill themselves and get into different kinds of jobs. What tourism sector and building sector in many cases is we take people with the entry-level position or low skill base, and what we do as a business is we develop those people, and we give those people the tools to grow in the industry that they've chosen and contribute and grow. And if those positions are all filled by working holiday visa, that whole skill base will be lost from the business. And so I'll give you one example if I can. If you look at a kitchen, historically kitchen people start, as a dishwasher, and they work their way through to an executive chef. Those are all valuable skills that they get through that time within the business, and they grow in salary, they grow in position. If we have that all done by working holiday visa, that will have a direct impact on all restaurants across New Zealand, because you're going to have people that are in the kitchen that don't actually have the skill base because they're just constantly turning over.
Chris, what's the pay rate for a cleaner at a Hilton?
Listen, at the moment, minimum wage is far from what most hotels are paying. I think every hotel in Queenstown, I think at least, they're at $23.50 to $25 now.
So are you politely saying that local workers don't want to work shifts, they don't want to get up early in the morning, and they don't want to be cleaners?
What I'm saying is that we are very privileged to live in New Zealand, and we don't want to work on weekends. We don't want to get up early in the morning. However, we want to have all those services available to us when we get up in the morning, and we want to get a coffee at the Starbucks or at a restaurant or at a hotel. So someone has to fill that gap. And it's not that we need people who are willing to work on the weekends. We need people that are willing to get up in the morning. And that's usually supported by a migrant workforce. And that's not New Zealand specific, that's global.
So in practical terms, what does this mean? Does it mean if you check into one of these hotels where normally they may come and clean a room every day, is that happening, or what is the deal?
Listen, of course that's still happening, but the reality is, once the business comes back, and you see on the news that, I saw an article yesterday that said, business is coming back, it's coming back full force. We need to make sure that we give the top level experience. The reality is there are not enough New Zealanders or people in New Zealand at the moment to service that. So what businesses are doing, and again, this isn't just hotels, they're restricting the volume of business that they can accept because they cannot go beyond that, because otherwise there will be problems in the service levels.
Thanks for joining.
I really want to stress just one last thing. This is not just tourism. It's not just Queenstown. If you look at building companies, they would take an apprentice and they would grow these people into these positions. It's in every sector where entry-level positions are the base, the starting point for people within that industry.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That's Chris Eamon, who is the General Manager of the Hilton in Queenstown. Love your feedback on that one. Do text us 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It's 10 to 6. The man who stabbed 4 people during a frenzied knife attack in a Dunedin supermarket has been jailed for 13 years. Luke James Lambert was this afternoon jailed on each of 4 counts of attempted murder. Our reporter Timothy Brown was in the High Court and joins us now. Tim, what more did you find out about the motive for this attack?
It's unclear what exactly motivated the attack, though a pre-sentence report shows Lambert had clear mental health issues and was in distress at the time it took place. He had lived an isolated existence for much of the decade before the attack, and this was made worse by his mother's death in 2018. He had lived in a car at one point, and at the time of the stabbings was homeless and had turned to alcohol and drug use. There's some suggestion he had hoped police officers would take his life, but he also detailed to an associate earlier in the day a doctor failing to prescribe medicine. However, police found no record of prescriptions not being fulfilled. Justice Eaton summed up that ultimately it may never be known what prompted the attack.
So a number of the victims spoke in court, and I understand that the media was able to view CCTV footage. So what can you tell us about that?
The victims have detailed the horrific injuries they've endured as a result of this attack. Many still deal with the pain and their injuries' lasting effects today. The media were allowed to view the footage of the incident, and to sum it up in a word, it was chilling. Lambert passed a mother and a child briefly before the attack, literally seconds before the attack, and then began the frenzy when he spotted a countdown staff member. The frenzy only lasted about 80 seconds, but caused life-threatening injuries to 3 people. Many rushed to assist the victims who were being attacked, including 2 off-duty police officers who threw objects from the shelves at Lambert before restraining him using chairs. There's even footage of an elderly lady who came along to assist while on the phone to police using her crutch as a weapon. Among those who rushed to help was George Fuenzalida. He spoke in court today.
I went to grab the knife off him, not realising he had 2 knives. I recalled you stabbing my neck repeatedly and pleading with you to stop, but you wouldn't. I was pleading for my life. My arm was useless and I couldn't defend myself. I could see it in your eyes that it wasn't registering. I could see it in your face that you wanted to kill me. You were on a mission to kill people that day, and I was at your mercy.
Luke Lambert was sentenced to 13 years on each of the 4 counts of attempted murder, which he'll serve concurrently. He was also handed a non-parole period of 6.5 years and won't be eligible for parole until late 2027.
Thanks for that update, Timothy. That's Timothy Brown there, reporting on the sentencing of Luke Lambert, who was involved in that knife attack in the Dunedin supermarket. A proposal to pump up crowd capacity at a popular New Plymouth concert venue is hitting a sour note with some. The Bowl of Brooklands currently has a capacity of 15,000, but the council's floated the idea of increasing it to 25,000 to attract bigger international acts and potentially covering its iconic lake. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Rob Martin has more.
The Bowl of Brooklands has hosted some of the biggest names in show business, including Fleetwood Mac and Elton John, and Kiwi favourites such as 660 and Crowded House. It's also the main stage for the WOMAD Festival. Council is reviewing its draft management plan for Pukakura Park and the adjoining Brooklands Park and has begun sharing ideas for the bowl with stakeholders. That includes self-styled park watchdogs, Friends of Pukakura Park. Its immediate past president, Dave Bruce, says the council events team is pushing for an increased capacity.
Because there's a mistaken belief, on my view, that we need to have capacity for 25,000 people, that otherwise you won't get the big acts. Well, you can go to Auckland to watch the big acts if you really want to. We can do better locally.
The council currently builds a platform across the lake for bigger shows, and Mr Bruce questions the need to make that permanent.
What do we have, 17 for the Seekers way back in the dim dark past, which was probably about as big as we've ever had. And we did that without the platform in front of the stage. So when you start looking at the bowl as an entity and try to get 25,000 people in there, it doesn't work.
He says although people focus on the lake, the council proposal also involves resculpting the hillside and terraces, relocating the driveway, and the removal of buildings and trees. Suzanne Porter is the Chief Executive of the Taranaki Arts Festival Trust, which puts on the WOMAD Festival. She's open to the idea of the lake being covered.
If you stand on that bowl stage, you're actually looking out into blackness quite a bit. There's just these, and I've quite often been side stage watching a bowl act at night. It's hard work. You're quite distant from your audience. They get their energy and their vibe back from the audience. So it's quite a hard venue to perform in.
Ms Porter warns any proposal involving covering the lake will divide opinion.
I have no doubt it'll be contentious. It is beautiful, but there will need to be a balancing act, I think, there between the aesthetics and an improvement to the performance space for festivals and events in there.
She says increasing the bowl's capacity is not an issue for WOMAD, as it sees itself as a niche event. People out enjoying Pukakura and Brooklands parks had mixed views on covering the lake permanently.
To me it sounds worse to get rid of trees than to get rid of the pond.
I don't like this because I think it's destroying the beauty.
Yeah, I don't mind the lake there. I think there is I like that it's a little bit separated from the stage.
I don't see what's the point of permanently covering it if they can temporarily cover it for the use of concerts only, so people get to enjoy the waterways and the look of the place when there aren't concerts here.
I think it could be good for the capacity of the bowl, but it would be limiting the lake space for the birds that are always here.
Covering up the lake, I think it's going to spoil it, the park, and for the amount of extra people you'd get, I don't think it really warrants it.
It's just a unique atmosphere to have the water separating the audience from the performers, and I remember one year there were candles floating in the water and it was absolutely gorgeous.
The New Plymouth District Council says it has shared some ideas, but that is as far as it has gone, and it hasn't yet decided what will or what won't go out for public consultation.
Well, the feedback is flooding in tonight. You've got a lot of reckons. Let's start with petrol prices. Andy from Huntly says 91 petrol in Huntly is $2.91. This is without the Auckland tax. Can someone explain this? Not me, Andy, but we'll get on to that for you. Aucklanders should be screaming at Phil Goff to be removing his council petrol tax, says another listener. And just filled up, cost $2.69 a litre. The other day it was $2.58, this person says. Connect the dots, Kiwis, this listener reckons. Sea level rise as a result of fossil fuel use. We need every incentive to cut our car use. They are not alone. Someone else says petrol prices should be high. Fossil fuels are wrecking the environment. We have to curtail using them, and fast. On the issue of Mr Mallard trespassing Winston Peters, Bob says, on dealing with Winston is a bit like mud wrestling with a pig. After a while, you find that the pig enjoys it. Thanks for your thoughts, Bob. Someone else says, not a fan of Mr Peters. However, the position of the Speaker of the House demands professionalism, integrity and dignity. All three are absent with Mr Mallard. Christina says, Mr Peters only joined the protesters maskless, to insult the government's mandate, stating it was illegal occupation. He and Matt King are still angry at being out of Wellington like spurned lovers. However, Mr Mallard should step aside gracefully. We need a more sanguine speaker, says Christine. Another person says, I think the whole situation was well summed up by Peter Dunn. Winston was acting as we have learned to expect him to act. The speaker allowed himself to sink to petty politicking and unfortunately lost a lot of the respect due to that office. And another person says, well done, Trevor Mallard, standing up for democracy. The haters are going to hate it, moan and whinge, but deep down they know he is right. On the issue of a shortage of cleaners in Queenstown, this person says, pay more and get locals. Sam says, where can you live in Queenstown at $23 an hour? On Smash and Grabs, Gary says, where are parents of the young people involved in these raids and criminal activity? Good question, Gary, and in fact we'll be asking the police exactly that after the news.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. The man who stabbed 4 people in a frenzied attack in a central Dunedin supermarket a year ago has been jailed for 13 years on 4 counts of attempted murder. Luke Lambert's victims today told the High Court in Dunedin the attack had long-lasting effects. One of them, George Fuenzalida, said that when he went to help victims, he ended up becoming one himself.
We were nearly the end of our shopping when suddenly I heard a chilling scream for help. It was a scream of terror.
George Fuenzalida suffered life-threatening injuries when he tried to protect others. Lambert won't be eligible for parole until late 2027. Former long-serving MP Peter Dunn says the trespassing of Winston Peters from Parliament is grossly over the top. Mr Peters and former National MP Matt King have been trespassed for 2 years because they visited the illegal occupation earlier this year. The Speaker, Trevor Mallard, is responsible for the move. Mr Dunn says he has no truck for Mr Peters or his style of politics, but in this case, he's being badly treated.
He wasn't a critical part of the protest. He was there on one particular day, grandstanding in front of the cameras the way he always does, and he ends up being banned from the grounds for 2 years. I think that's grossly over the top for the expression of a political opinion.
Peter Dunn says the person who should be trespassed is in fact Trevor Mallard, who's not the right person for the job of Speaker of the House. Auckland's biggest flu vaccine rollout begins this week at the city's COVID vaccination centres. There's growing concern about a widespread flu outbreak around the country this winter, now the border is more fully open. The Northern Region Health Coordination Centre says that before COVID struck, as many as 2,500 people were hospitalised in Auckland with flu in 2019. It says that because influenza hasn't been circulating since then, immunity to it will now be low. 340,000 people in Auckland are eligible for free flu shots. The Chief Ombudsman says the mental health ward at Palmerston North Hospital is one of the worst in New Zealand. In a damning report, Peter Bosher urges officials to get on with building a replacement. Jimmy Allingham reports.
The Ombudsman says patients are being subjected to a sterile, stark and gloomy ward that lacks privacy and with a high needs part that is often crowded. He makes 17 recommendations, including doing urgent maintenance work and reducing the disproportionate number of Māori patients put in seclusion. But a $35 million replacement for the ward, that was slated to open later this year, is delayed, with RNZ revealing yesterday it will be another year at least in coming. The Mid-Central DHB says it accepts the Ombudsman's recommendations.
The downturn in the housing market is spreading beyond the major centres. The Core Logic Index, a national measure of housing prices, fell by 0.8% in April, the first drop since August 2020. Prices are down in Auckland, Wellington and Dunedin, but seem to be plateauing in Christchurch. They've also fallen in Manawatu, Whanganui, Hawke's Bay and Palmerston North. Core Logic expects the decline to be gradual, provided the labour market remains tight. The Real Estate Institute says it's not clear if new data on sea level rise will turn people off coastal properties. With the sea predicted to rise up to 30 centimetres in many places in the next 15 to 18 years, the Sea Rise site allows people to check how much risk their homes are at. The Institute's chief executive, Jen Baird, is encouraging buyers to look at the data, but says it's hard to tell if it will have an impact on their decision-making.
It's such a personal thing. People will make decisions about their own lives and their own investments and will have their own level of risk tolerance.
The new logo for Matariki, Te Tohu o Matariki, has been unveiled. The Prime Minister was among those gathered at the Carter Observatory in Wellington today to learn about the tohu and its relevance. Each of the 9 stars has a different colour associated with it and is depicted by woven stitches as a tukutuku design. One of the logo's creators, Tyrone Ohia, says the artwork represents Aotearoa uniting as one.
So they cross in and out of each other and hold each other together, and similarly we're hoping that it's a metaphor for us as a nation coming together under this Māori kaupapa to celebrate in a distinctively Aotearoa way that's inclusive of all of us.
Matariki will be celebrated for the first time as a public holiday on June the 24th. And a steam cloud was visible above Mount Ruapehu for nearly an hour this morning, but GNS Science says no seismic or acoustic activity was associated with it, which indicates it wasn't generated by strong activity in the crater lake. There's been elevated volcanic unrest for the past 6 weeks, but the alert level remains at 2. GNS says more steam plumes are expected over the coming months. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's mathematician Dylan Mayhew on how artificial intelligence will help us crunch more complex collections of numbers in the future. Tony Stamp samples the Christchurch band Best Bets. And Duncan McGillivray teases out the facts behind the real-life fraud of Elizabeth Holmes, who conned millions out of folk with her promise of a test for every disorder under the sun, from a single drop of blood, on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Fine for Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, apart from isolated showers. From Waikato to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Also for Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mainly fine with areas of fog morning and night. A few showers about Gisborne tomorrow and isolated showers elsewhere tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, mostly cloudy with a few showers until this evening. Long fine spells tomorrow. Looking to Te Waipoinamu, Nelson and Marlborough. Fine apart from isolated afternoon showers about the ranges and low cloud tomorrow evening. Mainly fine in Canterbury and Otago. However, there's low cloud or fog about the coast and the Canterbury Plains at times. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, also for Southland. Fine apart from isolated showers about Bulla, Northland, Westland and Southern Fiordland until this evening. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower. It's just gone 7 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A cost of living crisis and questionable MIQ decisions have arguably seen Labour plummet in the latest News Hub Reid research poll. In breaking news, the party now sits at 38.2%, a drop of 6.1%. National has taken advantage, jumping 9.2% to 40.5%. Meanwhile, Jacinda Ardern's personal popularity is waning. She's down 7% to 36.3% as preferred Prime Minister. Christopher Luxon has gained 6.1% to 23.9%, making him the most popular national leader since Bill English. The only other leader registering is David Seymour. He's 5.1% and a 2.8% drop for the ACT Party leader. That is the latest Reid research poll there. Anyone else think we're already in election year? Right. Police concede the pandemic and MIQ duties mean resources have been diverted away from youth aid and they are playing catch up. An 11-year-old ram raid driver and a 7-year-old burglar in recent days raises questions about what happens to youth offenders and whether they are getting off too lightly. Police Prevention Manager Inspector Brent Register explains a referral to youth aid isn't a free pass.
There's not a lot of understanding in the public about the way that the youth justice system works. And police's youth aid system is really there to prevent reoffending and re-victimisation of of people, and it's with that in mind that we go through a whole process to try and keep as many of those youths out of court as we possibly can.
Right, so maybe you can help people understand that. How do you decide whether a young person gets charged or whether they go down a different route?
So there's a number of factors, Lisa. It starts with the offence itself. So at what level is that offence? Is it a small shoplifting, willful damage type tagging offence, all the way through to some of the very serious offences, whether that be sexual assault, manslaughter, murder type offences. So there's a spectrum of offences that we first look at. Then we look at, has that person come to police attention before? That's a factor in what we've done with them before to help them either stay out of the youth justice system, because we know that once a youth turns up in the youth justice system, they are more than likely going to return to that system. So that's the whole premise of trying to keep them out of the system.
So do you know what percentage of young people involved in crimes actually get diverted away from the court system and into youth aid?
Yeah, so about 20% of our top-level offenders turn up in youth court. The other 80% are dealt with in various ways, alternative actions, family group conferences. A number under the age of 13 are also dealt with by Oranga Tamariki in their care and protection sector.
It is hard not to generalise, but where are the parents in all of this? Because when you hear that a 7-year-old is involved in a serious burglary or an 11-year-old has been behind the wheel of a car in a ram raid and is the getaway driver, you go, hang on a minute, didn't your parents know you were out at 1 a.m. in the morning?
Yeah, look, it's really easy to point the finger at parents, but in a number of the cases, the parents are trying their absolute best. And look, I'm not defending our hardcore youth offenders out there that are committing some of the really serious offences. But what I'm saying is some parents are doing absolutely everything they can do. They'll be sitting up with their young people till 12:30 before they go to sleep, and then that's when the youth might leave the premise. Lots of parents are under a lot of stress. Whether that's through the COVID issues we've been having, whether it's not being able to get good education for their children or keep their children in education, having to give up work to be at home to look after these children is another big issue.
Have you guys, in youth aid have you got the resources that you need to deal with this?
Look, I think we do. We've had increases in our youth aid staff over the last 3 or 4 years. What it is, it's really what we need is the multi-agency approach, and we're certainly trialling that at the moment in Counties Manukau. What I mean by that is police can't do it all for these young people. There is some parenting issues, there is some education issues, there is the social deprivation issues. So we need what I'd like to say is a multi-agency response to some of this youth crime. We can't do it alone. We try our best, but we can't do it alone.
Are you back to basically a full contingent of youth aid officers? Because I understand during COVID that a number of them were diverted to other duties involved with the pandemic. So are you playing catch up?
Yes, look, we are. And there's no secret that we have had a lot of our staff diverted to either MIQs or helping with the COVID response, whether that be helping vulnerable communities that didn't have food. We've had staff shortages ourselves due to COVID, like every other business in New Zealand. What we have been able to do since the release of the MIQs is repurpose those staff back into the original places, whether it be youth aid or whether it be our school community officers. So we do a lot of prevention work through our school community officers, and they haven't been able to be in schools due to COVID. So the more that those COVID restrictions are lessening, the more that we can get our school community officers back in those schools.
A child as young as 7, and they are a child, they're a kid, right? You can't charge them, can you? There's not much you can do in respect of taking them down a formal process, right?
That's correct, absolutely. And look, a 7-year-old may not even know the difference between right or wrong, or may have been led by their elder sibling, may have been led by friends, peer pressure, all of that sort of stuff. We need to take a look at the whole family situation. Why is that 7-year-old out and about? Who's leading that? Are there some good role models we can put them in touch with? And look, we work really closely with the Oranga Tamariki around any child that's under 13. and that's that care and protection that we're really considering.
What would you say to parents who may be struggling with a situation with their children and they're worried that, well, they could go off the rails?
Reach out and ask for help. There's so many different places you can ask for help, and I'd encourage them, if they are worried that their child is heading down the path of crime, ring the local police station, go in and see a youth aid officer, have that discussion and conversation. But also, Oranga Tamariki really take the lead on anyone under 13 in terms of that care and protection. And I keep using that term care and protection because that's what it's about for someone under 13. We need to really look at the care that's provided for them and protecting them from getting into these situations where they are either committing burglaries or driving vehicles.
Inspector Brent Register there. It is 15 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Volcanologists say they've seen a steam plume from Mount Ruapehu visible for 45 minutes. Mount Ruapehu is putting out the strongest tremor or vibrations in 2 decades, and the crater lake temperature has risen to 39 degrees this week. Nobody is allowed within a 2-kilometre radius of the summit. But as Sam Ollie reports, skiers are being told not to cancel their plans.
The Whakapapa and Tūroa fields are on Department of Conservation land. Tongariro National Park Safety Ranger Theo Chapman says at Volcanic Alert Level 2, some lifts and trails may be closed.
Should an eruption occur, then we look at there's reflex closures around that. But even then, it doesn't mean that it's going to stay closed. The situation is reasonably fluid, but I think the thing to emphasise to the public is that yes, we all anticipate there being a ski season.
Ruapehu last erupted in 2007. Ash, rocks and water spread across the summit, producing lahars in 2 valleys, one in Whakapapa ski field. If it happens again during ski season, people would be told to move out of valleys and take shelter from rocks and ash clouds behind banks and ridges.
If an eruption is detected, then there's audible sirens and a voice message that are activated in high-risk lahar paths.
Massey University disaster management professor David Johnston thinks safety is being well managed at the mountain and he hopes to ski there this winter.
So it will be open if it's safe to do so and hopefully good snow and good skiing. But it's different. We cannot predict the future. It's like trying to forecast the weather 6 months from now.
Dr. Harry Keys has bought a season pass this year. He spent decades helping develop volcanic risk management plans in the Central Plateau and says one of the biggest safety challenges is education. Dr. Keys says some people don't look at the posters on the field or hazard maps online.
Around about 80 to 90% of people get it, but that means 10 to 20% of people don't get it, and it's a bit distressing.
He says there have been 8 dangerous near misses at Ruapehu since the 1940s, and safety plans have been improved each time, especially after the September 1995 eruption, just after the fields closed for the day.
People were quite high in the mountain still. There was no one in the T-bar area where the lahar came down. But if they had have been, they would have been in danger.
Ruapehu Alpine Limited, which runs the ski fields and Skywaka Gondola, declined requests for interviews. In a Facebook post 3 weeks ago, it discouraged people from doing the Skyline Walk near the crater, but it said only one chairlift, Tūroa's High Noon Express, was in the 2-kilometre crater exclusion zone in place. Ruapehu Mountain Clubs Association President Linda Darnan says people can't muck around if the sirens go off.
You won't ski ahead of a lahar, you've got to get to high ground. That might mean taking your skis off and just walking uphill.
GNS scientists say most likely there won't be an eruption in the next month. They say a large eruption, as seen in the mid-1990s, is very unlikely and would probably follow a sequence of smaller eruptions. Ski season normally opens at Ruapehu in July.
Attempts to evacuate more civilians from the city of Mariupol have now stalled. Ukrainian officials say Russia has ended a ceasefire and it's now blocking humanitarian corridors. There are still hundreds of women and children trapped in bunkers beneath the huge Azovstal steelworks in the city. It's surrounded by Russian troops. As the BBC's Laura Bicker reports, around 100 people were evacuated yesterday.
A short break to feel grass under their feet after weeks of only concrete.
The survivors from Mariupol are allowed a break in their long-awaited journey away from the front line.
For a month we were eating, over 40 of us, 6 food tins. We boiled 2 buckets of soup out of them, and that was it for the whole day.
There is no house anymore. Of course there isn't.
This is Mariupol after 2 months of war. Homes, play parks, cafes are now charred in blasted ruins. Tens of thousands of people are thought to have died. Many of the survivors came here, the Azovstal steel plant. As the city fell, pounded into smouldering ashes, Ukrainian fighters used the underground chambers to stay and fight.
There were 5 very powerful bomb shelters that, according to Soviet standards at the time, could withstand a direct nuclear strike. All people, if they were injured during the bombing and shelling, could come to us. We thought it was possible we'd be shelled, but we did not expect such a genocide and such an inhumane war.
For weeks, women and children lived in these maze-like tunnels. They used them as a refuge. Appeals to get them out of the plant were ignored until now. Yesterday, for the first time in more than 60 days, they clambered out of their dark refuge and were led through the rubble out of what many had described as hell.
President Biden will travel to Alabama tomorrow to visit a factory that produces Javelin anti-tank missiles. The White House says he will thank workers there for the extraordinary contribution those missiles have made to Ukraine's defence. Our correspondent Simon Marks reports.
President Biden will head to the city of Troy in Alabama and a Lockheed Martin plant that has been manufacturing the Javelins and other weapon systems that the Ukrainians have been using to such great effect. Crate after crate of them have been shipped to the Ukrainian armed forces in the weeks leading up to the Russian invasion and since it began. And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the president's visit is designed to thank workers at the plant for their role in Ukraine's resistance.
They're highly lethal, and we've sent over 5,500 Javelin anti-armor systems to Ukraine to support the Ukrainian people's fight for freedom. The president will underscore the role that the men and women who work at the facility in Alabama making these weapons have had in the fight in Ukraine.
He'll also use his visit to urge Congress to give him the $33 billion he now wants to spend on more weapons and humanitarian assistance. And the White House has its eye on the calendar. On May the 9th, Victory Day will be commemorated in Russia. Not this year, just the date when the country celebrates victory over the Nazis in World War II, but President Putin had hoped it would be the day he would also celebrate victory this year over Ukraine. That is clearly not going to happen, and instead there's speculation the Russian leader might use the commemoration formally to declare war on Ukraine. Leading Democrat Senator Bob Menendez, who chairs the powerful Foreign Relations Committee, says that won't make much difference.
Putin has declared war against Ukraine. Whether he does it formally or not is inconsequential. Can one country, in this case Russia under Putin, erase the borders of Europe, change a country by force? Or will the international order prevail?
But the White House yesterday indicated that President Biden is hoping to be able to unveil more help for Ukraine to mark the May 9th anniversary. Again, Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
Well, we know that President Putin has emphasized the significance of this day for him and for the Russian military, but I expect we'll have more to convey about what we will do in advance of Monday.
You'll announce more things that the United States will do ahead of May 9th?
We will certainly mark our support for the Ukrainians and the Europeans in some capacity, but I don't have anything more specific at this point in time.
The president's visit to Alabama is largely designed to send a message in the direction of the Kremlin rather than in the direction of restless American voters. Alabama is a fervently Republican state, and local elected officials seem pretty cool about the president's visit. But the White House wants Vladimir Putin to know that Joe Biden isn't just touring the place where the missiles that have killed so many Russian troops are manufactured. He's also preparing to order up more of them.
A US warrant is out for the arrest of an Alabama corrections officer after a man accused of murder escaped jail. Officer Vicky White and inmate Casey White are not related, but both were reported missing on Saturday. Now the sheriff says both are on the run, dangerous and possibly armed. CNN's Ryan Young has more.
Just hours ago, investigators issuing an arrest warrant for corrections officer Vicky White, who they say may have helped a dangerous inmate escape.
If she did this willingly, and all indications are that she did, I guess we're trying to hold on to that last straw of hope that maybe for some reason she was threatened and did this under coercion, but absolutely you feel betrayed.
Friday morning, the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office says Assistant Director Vicky White told her co-workers she was taking inmate Casey White to the county courthouse for a mental health evaluation. Casey White is awaiting trial on murder charges. Investigators say security video shows the pair never arrived at the courthouse and no evaluation or court appearance was even scheduled. Several hours later, White's patrol car was found abandoned in a shopping center parking lot less than a mile away from the detention facility.
We've gotten a couple of tips on a possible vehicle. We're still pursuing that.
Investigators say they still have no evidence of a relationship between them.
We're still looking into that, reviewing phone calls, reviewing video from the jail to see if she spent any kind of extraordinary amount of time at his particular cell.
So we're actually told Casey White was inside that cell, where the second door is, where you see that brass handle. He was brought out of that cell and brought down this direction, and this was all done the regular way it would be done during any time someone was transferred. They then brought him to that deputy before she took off down a Sally Port with him.
Vicky White's mother is in disbelief that her daughter could have helped an inmate escape.
I never heard of him, never seen his picture, nothing. I didn't know anything about him.
Davis says her daughter, who was a widow, recently sold her home and had been living with her. The sheriff's office says last week, after about 2 decades with the department, Vicky White put in her retirement papers. Friday was supposed to be her last day. Davis says her daughter didn't talk about work often and never brought up anything about retiring or inmate White.
She's always been, what I'd say, a good person. And like I say, this is all a shock.
Casey White was already serving 75 years for a rash of crimes. Next month, he's scheduled to go on trial on 2 counts of capital murder for the stabbing death of Connie Ridgway in 2015. Tonight, investigators are hopeful he'll soon be back behind bars.
Keep in mind that Casey White is a large individual. He is 6 feet 9 inches tall. You know, there is the possibility that he's changed his identity as far as his looks, but he will stand out.
UK research suggests repetitive concussions in sport can have a damaging impact in later life, especially for women. The UK will unveil new rules spelling out how long athletes must rest after being concussed. The BBC's Hugh Pym reports.
It's the game we love, but what are the risks?
You've got to stay on the sides this time, let's go!
Thursday night training for Actonian's women's team. There are concerns about concussion and long-term injury from repetitive heading and collisions.
People can see the serious risk that is coming over time.
Early research shows women can be more vulnerable than men.
It only takes 2 people to go up for a header for a ball. You get each other's heads instead of the ball. You know, you're fully focused on winning that. It's time that now something serious happens about it, and there is more awareness. And it's good that it's finally arising, especially just ahead of the Euros this summer.
Just put your head back slightly, please, towards me, a bit more.
Jess is trying out a new brain scanning device, one of several being developed around the world.
Click the mouse when you hear the high pitch.
The idea is that sports clubs could scan all players at the start of the season using these images for comparison if an injury occurs, looking at how the brain's been affected and when it's safe to start playing again.
You can stop now, relax, open your eyes, have a little rest.
Is this applicable to all types of sporting clubs?
Absolutely.
Amateur, different age groups, not just professional?
Absolutely.
It really is realistic, is it?
It's absolutely realistic. It doesn't matter whether you're amateur, whether you're elite, whether you're at horse racing, whether you're at boxing, whether you're at football, hockey, rugby. It doesn't matter. You can have one of these in your physiotherapist kit room, and if somebody is concussed, for whatever reason, it's applicable to them at that time.
So how did Jess get on with her trial run with the scanning device?
So your scan with these data is going to look like that, like the one at the front one, the baseline, nice and normal.
Nice.
You've got a brain.
Yeah, thankfully.
It's early days for the technology. More studies are needed to assess if it might help. New UK-wide concussion rules are due to be drawn up later this year, building on what's in place in Scotland. The aim is letting people play their favourite sports while keeping them safe.
Some more feedback on the smash and grabs. Peggy's got in touch to say, I am the parent of one who went off the rails when younger. It took a lot of effort from me and a plea to the local police to put him back on track. I thank the police so very much. Thanks for getting in touch, Peggy. Another person is quoting Robert Kennedy to us. Society gets the criminals it deserves. On employment and the lack of cleaners in Queenstown, this person says, how does a cleaner on minimum wage grow their skills? And Anna says that not all young New Zealanders are reluctant to get up early to work. My daughter's first job was cleaning at McDonald's, 4 a.m. till 12. My son works at Bunnings from 7 a.m. They want to work, so they do what they have to. And now that is about all we've got time for. Don't forget the Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening. If you missed anything on the show or you want to listen back to something, you can get Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi Pōpō tomorrow from 5 o'clock. First Up speaks to a hospitality business on Waiheke Island. They're finally getting customers through their doors, but they still can't get the staff. They need to cash in.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. The man who stabbed 4 people in a frenzied attack in a central Dunedin supermarket a year ago has been jailed for 13 years on 4 counts of attempted murder. Parliament's Speaker says all parties, except ACT, have agreed that no former MPs, such as Winston Peters, should be exempt from trespass orders issued in connection with the occupation of Parliament grounds. And a recent surge in the number of ram raids and burglaries in Auckland has left shop owners and staff fearful. Those are the headlines.